Peter or Sarah?
We
Anywhere
have,
between 20 and 40 usually, right, Pete?
Yeah.
20
yeah,
and 40.
yep. Well, and let's just go ahead and start. It's good to have you all here. Thank you all for joining. Thanks for coming back for another great Wednesday night together. And before I start, Sarah, is there anything, or Maria? These are great sessions where we come together with both MSL and BIOS. Do either of you have anything you'd like to share before we begin?
Not me. I'm just really excited to hear from Coach Clark. If for those of you who are keeping up with the Sport and the Growing Good podcast, Coach Clark was one of the first interviews you did, right, Pete?
The first.
The first
We're
one.
up to over 150 some now. And the first one was Coach Clark.
So exciting.
So I'm like at the convenience store. I'm the dollar they have taped up to the wall. Just that, the
Yes,
$1.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, it's better than nothing.
It's now a highly professional operation, Coach. It's
Yeah, good. I believe it.
very, very, very well polished. Well, and Maria, I forgot, I was going to pass it to Maria, but you have some audio issues, Maria, today.
Yeah, can you hear me okay with this right now? Okay, perfect. No, we'll have all of these on uwbios.com as well, and also on our BIOS YouTube channel that houses just a lot of the work that we do as well. So for anybody on the Zoom, that's always a great resource. And I know that Dr. Sarah always puts it in all the modules and things like that. So always here to help, be a resource, and excited to learn along with you all.
As we've had the last few weeks, we will start off with kind of a primer with some research, some background, and then we have a chance for some dialogue and Q&A with our guests. And today's guest is very special, Coach Chris Clark, and we'll say more about Coach Clark in a moment. You all know Coach Clark is the director of rowing and the longtime head coach of the men's rowing program, the longest tenured coach in the UW sports program up as of now, right, Coach? The
Correct.
Yeah. Now been at the helm longer than anyone. So Coach has tremendous perspective on many things as well that you may not see in his official bio, as he is also was himself a high-level athlete, a great rower, champion in many ways, as well as a parent of some great young athletes, including one who's playing SEC football right now. So he has the perspective from many different angles, and we're going to draw from that today. So I want to thank you, Coach Clark, for being with us. I'm sharing my screen for a moment. I'll take this off. We had a quick chat yesterday, and I've enjoyed speaking periodically with Coach over the years about kind of the evolution of college sports and where it's coming. A lot of our group, Coach, are people who are interested in coaching at the college level or in being an athletic director at the college level, are also people who are interested in the pipeline before college, as well as some who are interested in the professional level. So all of these are affected by the changes that we're seeing in college sports right now. And before we begin with Coach Clark, we wanted to provide a little historical perspective about kind of where we've been. These are not all the things, but just a high level kind of touching on some of the big things that have happened over the years. I sent Coach a list a little bit earlier, and I started with what I thought was the beginning, which was 1869, but he quickly, in about 30 seconds, gave me an email back. Coach, you corrected me. Tell us about what happened in 1852.
1852 was the first American collegiate competition of any kind, Harvard and Yale in rowing. And the first in the world was Oxford and Cambridge in rowing in 1829. So that was the very beginning of collegiate rowing. And as an aside, the blazer that everybody wears, that used to be sportswear, and it was invented by Oxford and Cambridge. And it was what they wore when they rowed. That was considered extremely casual wear. So that's just a weird tidbit from history. But the blazer, and you see them in rowing a lot at competitions, but that's what it was. It was the original like sports jacket, basically.
If any of you have seen Coach Clark around campus, he's usually wearing a blazer. So
No,
just kidding.
That's ridiculous.
Just kidding. But so that's fascinating. But the history, we're talking before the Civil War. This is a lot,
Right.
unbelievably going a long ways. And I won't touch on all these things, but you see, then so football starts. This first football game, which was historic between Rutgers and Princeton. The formation of the NCAA in 1906. Some of you may know as well that the Big Ten Conference was one of the original conferences formed shortly after, right around that same period. Of course, Title IX in many years later, and of course, I'm skipping over a lot here, but Title IX, we celebrated 50 years of Title IX last year, a major development, giving women a chance in sport at the college level. In 1975, some more kind of popular culture things that happened. One was the expansion of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. Some of you may know that the NCAA tournament is the major revenue producer for the NCAA. College football revenue is kind of a different stream, but that tournament, which was expanded to 32 teams in 1975, is now, I believe, 68 teams. And every time you want to ask why did it get bigger, the answer usually is money, and that is the case with a lot of these as well. There is some opportunity here as well, but 1975, the NCAA basketball tournament. In the 1980s, we started to see the growth of the industry. For those of you who are young in college right now, this is still before you were born, so you may think that we always had these, fancy facilities and coaches were always paid millions of dollars, the football and basketball coaches, but that was not the case prior to like the 1980s and 90s, when a lot of the revenues started to come in through the media contracts. A couple other just I'll highlight upon before going to Coach Clark. 2014, the college football playoff started. Again, another kind of a landmark change in college sports. Three last things I'll cite, and these are things that we're seeing a lot of you are experiencing now. The 2010s, this went on for a number of years. There was a basketball player named Ed O'Bannon who played basketball at UCLA, and his name is used a lot, and that he was one of the first names whose name was circulated in judicial cases that led ultimately to a case that led to NIL stuff coming to fruition. That was a long simmering topic in the courts in many spaces. Started kind of in the 2010s. Ongoing stuff, as you keep reading about and hearing about, and we'll be experiencing soon, is conference realignment and having all these teams changing. We're called the Big Ten Conference, but next year we'll have 18 teams. And traditionally, what was known as a Midwestern group of schools now will go from, the Seattle area, coast to coast, all the way to, to the East Coast. So that's not unique to our conference. We're seeing that in a lot of conferences. 2021, a lot of you, again, some of you may be benefiting from this, from the NIL legislation that happened in 2021. The world of college sports changed radically in these last few years, and that's one of the aspects of it. I'll say one other thing that's not on this list was the some NCAA legislation that led to student transfer, one-time transfers being able to occur with greater ease. So now we see a lot more transferring going on, as a lot of you have experienced, a lot of you know that is happening. So all of this being said, we're not doing this to have a quiz or to say that you need to memorize these things. And again, this is just a selection of some things that happened. But we read about a lot of these things kind of in the, in ESPN or in the New York Times or that's where older people like I read about it. You read about it probably on social media and stuff. But there are many angles to each of these decisions, things like NIL, conference realignment, the revenue generation, where revenue goes. broad-based programming, whether you have, how many teams does Stanford have, Coach?
I think it's 31.
31.
It could be as many as 35 or 36, though. I can't remember.
In some schools, Ohio State has up in the 30s. We have 23 teams at Wisconsin. If you have experienced schools in the South in the U.S., if any of you have been to, say, down to Ole Miss or to some of the schools in the SEC where Coach's son plays football, some of those schools have more like 14 teams. They don't have nearly the number of teams we have. They have the bare minimum in order to meet the Title IX requirements. They don't have as broad a base of programming as a lot of ours do, and there are a lot of reasons for some of these things. So as a lot of these changes are happening historically, as we've seen kind of the ebbs and flows of opportunity for different groups come and go, but more opportunity has been created. We're at an inflection point now where revenue is coming in at higher levels than ever, but it's also being dispersed in new and different ways. So with all that being said, just setting the context, I want to, first of all, Coach, get your initial reaction to some of these events and how you have experienced them over the years as a competitor, as a coach, and even perhaps as a parent, if you have reflections, just to broadly hand it to you now to start us off.
Thanks, Pete. I have to admit, I'm a little selfish because I could have just narrowly talked about rowing. I will say one thing about that in a second, but this stuff interests me. I'm still a newspaper guy. And one thing I don't get about newspapers, remember in economics, this supply and demand, right? The demand is low, so theoretically there should be more supply, but definitely prices drop. Instead, I've noticed I spend 5 times more for a newspaper that nobody buys. But I'm that sucker. And I try to, I can waste time with the best of them, but I'll try to read the State Journal, I read the Milwaukee Journal, and then I hard copy the Wall Street Journal, and then online, the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Denver Post, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and I'm probably and the Tennessean, and I don't read them all. It's just incredible if you're good at wasting time. Boom, I'm your guy. So that means my knowledge on these things is a mile wide and an inch deep because I'm reading about it in the press. But it's super interesting to me. The one thing I'll say about rowing is it's the only sport I've ever heard of that was conceived as that started as a form of capital punishment. 2,000, 3,000 years ago, people were in the triremes and and they battled in these giant rowing boats, and those weren't paid people and they weren't volunteers. It was, God, we're just going to have to, these people offended the kingdom. We're going to have to, execute them all or put them in prison for life. No. I have a better idea. We'll row them to death. And for real, that's what they did. They rowed them to death. So that tells you a little more about, and what that says about the rowers, I don't know, but it's a super traditional sport. And in many ways, didn't modernize. Only it's playing catch up the way they should have. I think swimming is the most brilliant point-to-point race marketing strategy in history. Here they do, for people that aren't involved in swimming, people like me. They have 4 different disciplines, I believe, and they just keep racing the same thing. Except, we'll go 50 meters. We'll go 100. We'll go 200. We'll go 400, 800. Why not 1,600? It's the same thing over and over. And it allows people like Michael Phelps to win 25 gold medals. There's plenty of rowers that could do that if they raced 100 meters, 250 meters, 500. It was just brilliant. And I don't know where rowing blew it, and they're never going to get it back, but I envy swimming. So that's my rowing talk. But mainly about this, I figured these are the type of subjects that everybody gets into. And some of the weird things I've seen over time, I would say I definitely am a bit of a rebel. I don't like people telling me what to do without a reason for it. Even coaches sometimes, but I just remember that it was clearly made aware to us coaches. This was a while back, that, for example, if it was pouring rain or snowing, we couldn't pick up an athlete and give him a ride. That was an NCAA violation that they would punish us for, no matter what. It could have been a hurricane out. That's just an example of the stupidity of the rules. And another was that you could only give for snacks bagels and cream cheese. I thought, who came up with that rule? The bagel lobby? And these are the kind of things you live with as a coach. And it hasn't changed much. And this, I wouldn't say it put me on the path to radicalism, but as far as politically, I suppose I swing every way depending on what the situation is. But I always feel I fall on the side of the workers, and I'm putting that in quotes. That's what a lot of the athletes are, especially in the revenue sports. And to me, I mean, they really give it their all. And all this liberalization is super welcome as far as I'm concerned. I was speaking to a rower today who I think is on this call or this Zoom, Grace Belson, and she just said she couldn't believe that there was a time when many of the things they take for granted. I mean, she wasn't really seriously saying she couldn't believe it, but it was amazing to her. And how quickly that's happened. If she's a fifth year, she just has, it's happened now, but you go back 10 years, it's very different. And the notions of amateurism, it's funny, I looked it up again. I knew what it was from, but amateurism is the ultimate privileged position. And it came from the Victorian England, and it was called muscular Christianity was the move. And it was the elite white folks of England and in this country that promoted it. And it was considered to be what the highest level of civilization was sport, good for the body, the mind, etc. And this seeped into sports because eventually pros, working class, started to encroach on the amateurs. So they set up an entire apparatus to keep pros out. And it's funny. I saw a quote from this article by a fellow who goes by one name, Amagus, in a online thing called The Age of Awareness. And the first quote he has is, history is a set of lies that people have agreed upon. That's Napoleon Bonaparte. And his title of this article is Amateurism is a Lie Agreed Upon. And I don't like to just sit here and read things, but it's really interesting if you look into it, just where it came from and how unbelievable it is. And there's really no basis for it whatsoever, but it's still what those in the power of college athletics insist on. Anyway, I'm not going to sit here and read all this stuff, but it's worth looking at it yourself, and you'll see how unbelievably privileged is a word you see thrown around a lot. This is the definition of it, and an entire college sports is based on it, all of it. And having a son in Division I football, I know how hard they work. And it's unbelievable how much time they put into it. And not that, quote, he deserves an enormous amount of money, especially O-line guys. They don't, no one even knows their name. But it's the revenue. I'd like to say this: name one corporation that, if all the execs just left, would the company last? No. But in athletics, it would keep going as long as the athletes were there and the coaches. The entire money-making operation would continue. That's how different it is. If the NCAA, I don't know if there's a replacement, but it's hard to be sympathetic. But on the other hand, Olympic sports like ours, in this way, Ivy League schools in particular have really been ahead of the curve. They've understood that the revenue, we're not going to pack stadiums in Olympic sports. But what is your ability and way to create revenue? It's usually loyal alums and endowments. Hence, many of the rowing teams have enormous endowments, 30, 40 million. And so but that has not been even remotely in general, especially at the big state schools like ours. But that's the path, I believe, you have to rally the alums. And men's rowing is trying to do it, and so is our women's rowing team. And it's happening. It's just a slow process. And unfortunately, like a lot of long-term fundraising operations, it's morbid. You're waiting for the old timers, you're not waiting for them, but they have to pass away and give you money. So it's not a quick operation. But to me, that's the one way that Olympic sports are obviously under threat. So, and that's one of the, it's funny, on one hand, I think that the basketball, football in particular should get everything they can. But on the other hand, I know more money is diverted to them, the more vulnerable Olympic sports become. But these are all interesting issues that I love to think about, and I go off on, sometimes just to myself or any poor fool that has to listen to me.
Well, we're lucky to be able to listen tonight, Coach. And I have, the term that you use, amateurism, there was a subtle shift. That was a term we were using even 5 years ago a lot still. And then there was this subtle shift. I don't know if a lot of people noticed, but it went from college sports as amateurs to the collegiate model. And so amateurism had as its underpinnings that, amateurs don't make money. But then we subtly shifted to the collegiate model, which left space for potentially those who are participating to generate income themselves. But there still is this idea of it's a collegiate model, meaning you have to be a student, you have to be at a university, you have to be enrolled in a major, you have to be getting the grades and making progress toward graduation. What do you think about that terminology, and how have you observed the collegiate model to be threatened, if at all, by changes like NIL and kind of high level revenue?
I just from my perspective, I only know really this athletic department, and we seem like such a model in so many ways, so much better than, you hear from colleagues, and you also just read about, this AD is getting fired for that. This football coach is getting fired for this. And wow, we are, bastion of stability. And also there's a real commitment here to broad-based athletics. So it never really feels here in any way that there's any, even any brush fires, let alone big forest fires. But one of the things I had read online, I don't think I printed it out, was just that the NCAA just determines, they just make up what amateurism is to fit what they want. And now it's that. And something I'd read, I never really thought of it, said the vast majority of people that get scholarships on a college campus are not athletes. And all of them don't wreck the collegiate model by being allowed to make money on what they're good at. Literally 90% of the kids on scholarship are not athletes. But not one person I've ever heard say that threatens the integrity of the collegiate experience, that those kids can work. But you can't as an athlete. So again, this is just one guy. I'm not quite in my mom's basement, playing games playing Xbox 5, and I feel like it a little bit on a Zoom. But I just appreciate that. I know other people want to talk about it and think about these things. And cynic isn't the right word. In some ways, I'm romantic in the sense of, and passionate about it. But I'm always for the athlete and the coaches, always. That's just, they're the first thing I think about. And I, frankly, and for years, it's just some of the crazy stuff you read. Obviously, the more stupid things you hear about some person is punished in some silly way, that it just sets me off. And I don't think about this all day long, by the way, 24 hours. You just asked me to talk about it. I don't want to think I'm completely insane, but I'm glad we're talking about it.
We at Wisconsin, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 student athletes. Many of them are not on scholarship, but still a lot of young people who get this opportunity to be on a team, to have great teammates, to have great facilities, great coaches, athletic experiences, physical development, all of the things that come with sport. How have you observed the differences across those student experiences changing in the last few years? In other words, you've been coaching here for many years, and were the experiences of the student athletes that you worked with, say in the 90s, 2000, early 2000s, notably different from those now? And if so, how?
Good questions. And I will say this, I have such a varied background, and I realize I have experienced a lot. I started at community college, the only one with rowing. I transferred to Stanford. I knew Stanford was not great at rowing. I thought I could live without rowing. So I was what they call a NARP for an entire year at Stanford. So I know what it's like to not have, and then I transferred to Berkeley. I know what it's like to not have sports. So I can certainly say that that part of it, that's irreplaceable, that every single kid in athletics is getting that experience. And I know what it's like to be in college and not be in it. It's terrible. And that definitely the fulcrum or the hinge on which every young life turns, and the young people don't even know it yet because they're doing it right now, is college athletics. It's the number one thing. And that's why I'm so pro college athletics. But how it's changed, it's interesting. The new head coach, Bo Hoopman, who graduated 2003, we had a little teeny equipment room in the old boathouse. I mean, I'm in one of my son's bedrooms, and it was about a third the size of this. And all the stuff we had, it had football like was crossed out, and then it said crew stamped on it, which are classic. And there was 2 bins that you see, the rolling bins, and one had old socks in it that were so stretched out, you couldn't even, it probably wouldn't be tight on your thigh. And the other thing sounds so gross, but it was old used jocks. And all the guys would joke around and put them on, and they were enormous. They said, Coach, this jock here really, over their clothes, they would joke and put it on and go, this thing makes me feel a lot less than a real man. And they were all and literally that's all they had were socks and jocks. And occasionally Bo makes the comment that when somebody gets fixated on gear, clothes or whatever, he just shakes his head and says socks and jocks. So they get so much more. Then that's one thing for sure. And obviously there's, even for the non-scholarship kids, they have meals. Me personally, I think they deserve it all. But there's something to be said for feeling you got to scrape a little bit. That's just my opinion. Now you talk to the old guys. It was, especially guys from the 70s, I found, and some in the 80s, but even the guys that I coached, when we, it's just like stay off my lawn, when I walked to school in the snow uphill. And it was cruder. And it probably was, well, it certainly was today in rowing in particular. It wasn't as safe or as organized as it is today by a lot of measures. But they definitely, it was 15 passenger vans everywhere and caravanning with CB radios. I think a lot of athletics were, and I don't think those guys would trade that for anything. However, the team aspect, the impact on a young life is not any different at all. No, but I don't know about some of the other sports. I only know about, and then there's the transfer thing that you've talked about, which really makes it interesting, especially in football and basketball. The kid's not happy, he's out. So
a couple of the issues that we talk about a lot in our program are mental health and kind of physical health in terms of, overuse injuries or even performance capacities. So elite performance physically, but then also mental wellness, like everything above the neck. Have you noticed changes in either of those areas? So are in terms of the mental state of your athletes, and also the physical, like what the athletes look like and the levels at which they perform physically?
That's a good question. I think that one is we're more aware of it. And sometimes when you're more aware of it, 2 things can happen. One is that you realize you didn't notice it before and you should have. Or that you start to see things that may just be normal stress. And I have to say, as a coach, and I'm sure that there's some coaches on this call, it's, at least for me, it's super anxiety producing that I have to be the front lines of mental health. It's scary. We had just over the years, like especially my first 10 years, there was a woman on the lightweight team and she died of meningitis. Another kid got hit by a car. They ended up dying in the same day. And then we had a kid who graduated in 2000, Dylan Capel. He became the second assistant, and I knew he was already sick at that point, died in January of his year working here. And then one of his teammates committed suicide in August of 2002. And this is all in a few years. And obviously, especially the poor kid that committed suicide, you think, God, I sure missed a lot of, I missed a lot. And so I'm far more, I compare if I see a kid that's even remotely like that. And we've had kids, you hear about it. And any kid that feels self-destructive, it's pretty rare that you hear about it directly from them, but I'll just ask them. But it still is scary because we're not healthcare professionals. But no doubt, one, we're more aware of it. Two, there probably is more of it. And part of it is just the enormous pressure, one, to get into college now, right? Everybody's flipped out that it's harder than ever. And then when you're here, you feel absolutely pressured to be great at everything, which is, they look at us, the coaches too, and they only see us now like we're it must have been easy for them. Heck no, it wasn't. And that's why it's important to be human and make them understand every single mistake or feeling you've had, every one of them we've had. That's one way I try to relate that. I'm not making this up to make you feel good, but everyone.
How else have you changed? You mentioned you're more aware now of the mental health of the student athletes. How else have you changed as a coach? What would you tell yourself in 23 years ago, 20 or 25 years ago?
The having children, definitely. If you have an edge, my nickname in college was Heater, and I'm not proud of it. Just meant I would go off constantly. And I was far more like that as a younger coach. And occasionally, though, I have to almost fake it to get where did that go? That burning fire of passion, and I think part of it is children. You spend, not that you only care about what they're doing all the time, 24 hours a day. It's just you put so much emotional energy into that, but it's also made you far more, I can relate to, especially young men, just because that's what I have, 3 boys. And I'm definitely not nearly as hot-headed. And part of the reason I did what I did, those young athletes need, not that it is necessarily age-based, but when I'm getting to a point where I'm worrying about my own energy levels, then they deserve more than that. And Bo in particular is 42, right in the prime zone of your coaching life. I wanted him to be the head coach and do his thing. Plus, it's best, I needed to step back. And so I'm joking. I think Vicky Opitz, the women's coaches on this, and I was just saying that I'm the chief hype man now, which when you're the head coach, no one appreciates a head coach that constantly says how great everything is, because you have to watch. Well, obviously we're not winning everything, so how could that be? But the hype man, you can be positive all the time, and that's where I am right now, which I love. And plus, I keep warning, and I put warning in quotes, that I'm going to go. I told some of the women, by the way, I said, I don't know yet what the achievement is, but if we can get an achievement big enough, I'm going to jump out of the launch in my clothes and swim to the dock. And there, yes. And I don't know, Vicky and I can figure it out, whatever it is. But that's the kind of crazy stuff I used to do. And I miss that. But now, boom, there's a little bit of, as they say in England, a renaissance of my own excitement. So that's where I am.
I want to pass it off to others for questions in a moment, but I have one last question here for you, Coach, which is the title that you gave me for the presentation is, is college sports better, worse, or just different? What's your answer to the question?
Different, but better. I think I remember talking to some of the administrators here, and none of whom are currently here. But I remember saying, you do understand you have the number one media asset in all of media. And every company in the world is a media company, Google, Apple, Amazon. they're primarily media companies. And I remember saying to them that don't undersell and don't think that this stream is going to dry up. Sports are more popular than ever, and people will pay enormous sums, and you're seeing it right now. I mean, that's a bright, I don't want to sound too much like a, Pollyannish, but it's true, and it's happened. But there's the scary part that you talked about. The more that comes in, the crazier the game gets, especially at the SEC level. And so instead of spreading the wealth, institutions, I feel forced, because Division I football is such a big, is the thing. So, but I think it's better but different.
Who has questions or comments for Coach Clark, and whether it relates to kind of the historical trajectory of college sports or anything relating to his coaching journey and perspectives you'd like to get from Coach Clark? Gerardo.
No, that's a homer right there. If Gerardo's going to ask you a question.
Coach, all right. If you say sports are better, is it easier to coach now, or is it easier 23 years ago?
I will say this, that I remember way back when I was at Oxford and we're studying the bureaucracy, and a guy named Max Weber, who was a German sociologist, he really was the first to ever study bureaucracy. And it's amazing how much it's grown. I mean, this is the very first study in the late 19th century. And there's rules upon rules, and you have to hire more people for the new rules, and then more people, and the NIL in its own way. I knew it would be a boon for rules because you have to hire people to manage that. So I'm sure, including people in administration, they feel inundated by it. It's an enormous undertaking. And that is just remarkable to me. And that's the hard part about it, I would say. And it was just, I'm not saying it was pure, but you're constantly being educated, and the athletes their time is spent doing all sorts of education. It's just unbelievable how different it is now. You'd have to ask them though. But of course, if they're new in college now, they don't know any different. So I'm not sure that it's turning out any smarter or more well-rounded kids than it did 25 years ago. They were pretty, again, talk to the kids that graduated, then they'll tell you they're better than ever. But that's what the old timers always say.
Coach, how has technology changed your coaching?
God, I remember Rob Porteous, who was our video guy here, and he once said to me, "Oh, well, you guys aren't really a video sport." And I looked at him and I said, here's a good example. Rob, do you think golf is an interesting sport to watch? And I said, I think it is if you're a golfer, but the power of TV and video is so powerful. It's made golf fun to watch because of the way they cover it, the great announcers. What do you mean rowing isn't a video sport? Every sport is. If we had our budget for it, I'd have, 50 guys out there videoing every day. And we just don't have the resources to do it. So that's one thing I wish we had more of that could impact us dramatically. And there's no question data has come in. And Vicky, I know, she has been with the national team for the last 10 years or so. So she's right on the cutting edge of all of it. But I often say the one good news about talking to this group is you haven't heard everything I've said. Now, Jonah Rain, who's on here, probably has. But I determined a long time ago, though, that, you ask, depending on the situation, especially about coaching or athletics, why, where, when, how, all that matters. It does. But what matters the most is who. That's it. Bill Belichick, to me, is a terrific coach, one of the greatest of all time. And I can't stand the Patriots, but I know how good he is. How much winning is he doing lately? Because he doesn't have the who's. So that's what it's about. No matter what the data says, it's all super important, but who? You've got to get better people all the time. So and every coach thinks that, and every coach is desperate to do that.
How about in terms of measuring, because your sport is such I'm going to botch my terms here, but just like a high physical exertion, you get on those erg machines, knowing the limits, like does technology help you know what limits to which you can push athletes and then better understand things like recovery and kind of like peaks and valleys of training?
I would say yes, but that's even more important at the elite level. Most of the bodies are more similar, certainly, than in the collegiate level. And you're looking for any edge you can get. And ironically, the boats themselves, there's a weight limit about 205 pounds. So in other words, it has to weigh at least that much, just so there isn't some arms race and you're getting $50 million boats like the America's Cup, right? That they spend enormous amounts. And then, some of the richest programs buy a boat that weighs 80 pounds and they use it 3 times and throw it away. But all of that and that's where Vicky I'm sure will have a great influence on the boathouse, because she's picked up a lot of things along that way. But with our athletes, their schedules are so crowded. You have to really be jealous of their time on their behalf. But people that are endurance athletes, they dig that high that comes from the endurance. So it's not like yes, it's cold and miserable sometimes. We all know that. But I think that they love the high that they get from the workout. So that alone can keep them centered and even in a depressing time, especially when they come down and don't feel like doing it. We've all done this. But when you're done, you go, man, that feels good. And the type of athlete we're looking for is, there are attributes in a lot of other sports, but no combination like ours, which is, in the men's side, you want 6'3" to 6'4" to 6'8" or 9, and 180 to 215, 220. That's the size. And they have to have huge lungs, but most importantly, they have to have the right head for it. If you've got those things, then you're it. And on the women's side, I can't speak exactly for the elite women that are on her, but I would say that, ideally from probably no less than 5'10" up to, 6'4" or 5. And here's a quick question I have. Pete, I'm older than you, but when I was in high school, I never saw any women that tall. And now you got 6'8" people where did they all come from? My mother was 6 foot and my sister's 6'1". Those were the tall people. But I have no idea, right? There's really tall women on campus now. I don't know where they were.
We should test your theory, because we have a data scientist in our lab, in our BIOS lab, and he entered every Big Ten athlete since, what year was it, Maria? 2000 or
2000? Yep.
Yeah, every Big Ten athlete since 2000 into his database, including their size. And so he can look at size trends on heights and all that. But although I don't know if rowers all list, I don't know if they list their heights.
Women
That's
don't.
Women
that's
don't
the most important thing.
Yeah. But we have trends. We have trend data on, I guess it would be football and the basketballs, and at least height data for soccer and
volleyball, track and
volleyball.
field.
Yeah.
And then soccer, men and women's soccer as well.
We've asked the same question. Are they getting bigger? They're definitely getting heavier in football.
That's for sure. Yeah. Remember the Fridge back in the 80s? He was over 300, and that seemed like some amazing thing.
Yeah.
I noticed on my Charlie, his football team, there's 16 guys 6'6" or over. And I think the biggest guy's 364, and he's on the lighter side at 312. And, that's just typical on a football team. But that was 20 years ago. That was unheard of.
Yeah. Maria, you had your hand up.
I do. Yeah. Thanks, Coach. I have a question. So your rosters are even larger than football, but you don't have as many coaches. What are you doing as a coaching staff to get to know all your players, help them get to know each other? What does that look like within your program?
It's funny. I think that people look at, rowing or any, let's say you could say softball or soccer. If we had the resources football had, we'd have about 20 more staff for sure. And the athletes deserve it, but that we also understand the situation we're in, and that's unlikely to happen. It's not easy. And me personally, my own best tool is I don't claim to be great at anything. Well, I am a quote a minute to the press. That I am. I can do that quite well. And I'm not bad at just standing up and making a speech, a stump speech. But I look carefully at every person every day, not when I'm even talking, and I can tell if something's wrong with them usually, because I have, in a day, I'll have a dozen or more, just quick, like, make up a name. Hi, Mary. How you doing? And once you get to know them that way, you can tell a lot. So you have to be hyper aware. I felt that's, if I have a strength, that's one of them, about what they're feeling and what's happening. And it's a way to compensate for the fact that you have very little time with them. And, in football, it's unbelievable how many meetings they have, their film and this. And then I'm impressed as heck but there's more of those coaches. So, even an offensive line group, which is a big one where he has his 19 kids, that's not much. And there's two coaches to do that, and right now, Vicky on the women's side, I think maybe today was the day so I don't know, it's 150 at least or something around there. So It's not easy and it's difficult. But again, there's three types of people that want to, the coach, they don't want to be near you. Two that are sort of moderately engaged with you, and other ones that just want to talk to you all the time. So, and I try not the ones that want to, I just push them off usually to assistants. I try just because I'm not always great at dialogue. I'm really good at monologue, but not always great at dialogue. I have to admit.
We're gonna do a check here with Jonah in a moment. After you sign off, like a truth check. What kind of stuff is actually happening? Or
yes, exactly. You're gonna yeah, it's like one of those factometer things you see in the newspaper to find out if any of it's true at all.
Check. Yes.
Maria, I'm sorry if I didn't. I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but I gave it a shot.
No, you did. Thank you.
Landry, did you have a question?
Yeah, yeah. I sort of have a semi follow-up question to Maria's question. So I know in recent years, there's been sort of a lack in resources and decline in participation and across all levels of Olympic sports like rowing and wrestling. And so I have a two-part question. So first, who do you think needs to take charge to help grow sports like rowing across all levels? Is it the Olympic Committee? Is it college coaches and college programs, or is it at the youth level that needs to help grow these programs? My second part of the question is, how do you, in the mass commercialization of college athletics, how do you protect your players in a low revenue generating sport, their resources, and help them find new opportunities with the crazy NIL world that we live in today?
Back to the first one, can you just repeat it just briefly? I just want to make sure I get it right.
Who do you think needs to take charge to help grow
Sure.
Olympic level sports? Is it?
I remember during COVID, all sorts of crazy things happened. And my son was rowing at Stanford when they said they were going to cut 11 sports. So I was right in the middle of that. And that was a debacle. I realized that because I can't keep my mouth shut a lot of the time. I can complain a lot about things, but it never always often occurred to me, well, maybe I should try to do something. And especially I complain about my sort of coaching forefathers, the guys from 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, when rowing was definitely a bigger part of college athletics than it is today, especially men's rowing. And it could be just like thoroughbred horse racing. I mean, who knows why, but that sport isn't as big of a deal as it was. But one thing I noted is we didn't even have a national coaching org at all, which is ridiculous because high school things have that. So I started that with another coach from Northeastern. And that's not exactly answering your question, but we have, and it's unbelievable how robust it is. And now we don't want to be those guys. I don't want 30 years from now, those idiots, they could have they saw this happening and they didn't do anything. But we just need advocates. It drives me nuts when athletic departments are that uncreative. Athletic departments, especially a lot of the I would say, marquee ones you always hear about. And you're cutting sports. You're that uncreative. I thought you guys were masters of the universe, but you're cutting. It's, oh God, we got to save this. We don't cost any money compared to meaning Olympic sports. It's inexcusable to me. And that whole Stanford thing was such a debacle. That AD came on and said, he said, we've exhausted all possibilities. That's absurd. He had nothing. And he didn't clear it with their board, what you'd consider their board of regents. He only went through what their athletic board was. And he still has a job. That's amazing to me. And now they've fumbled this whole thing with the Big Ten too. But we absolutely need help, all Olympic sports. There's no question. And I know that there was a few nationwide Zooms with ADs that appeared to be super supportive. It may have been the fellow from, I think, is it Gene Smith? I think from Ohio State and others. There has to be more people like that. There has to be. There has to be room for these sports. That's the whole reason college sports exist. It's only, no one planned the way it is, that everybody relies on football. It's just evolved that way. Well, we should be smart enough to get ourselves out of it without destroying American collegiate sports. That's that one. All right. What was the second?
Yeah,
the second part.
I completely agree, especially with Stanford's endowment. It seems like they
Yeah.
can figure something out. The second part of the question is, how are you individually helping your team protect your players from all these issues of mass commercialization and protect your resources? And
Well, I
give
wish
players
at this
opportunity?
point I've only heard about a few NIL things, and I wish there was something to protect them from. In other words, I don't think there's much action on that front. And I love the fact that the naysayers, the people that would ally with, we have to stay, this 19th century Victorian amateur, it's going to destroy college sports, really? And also somehow that the women were going to get cut out of it. Most of the women are the biggest money makers. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I wish more of it would trickle down. But again, that's not something I think that we should all sit around and just wish about. I just don't know how to proceed on it. It's still I've talked to Brian he's Brian Mason. Yeah. The head of NIL athletics. And he is super versed on it and extremely helpful. And they're there as a resource, but I still don't know enough about it to even promote it. It's such a, I guess, sort of a Wild West, but all everybody sees is, this guy here is making, a couple of $1 million a year. And I'm not expecting rowers to do that, but there's probably somewhere along the line, but I don't know how to, me personally, I don't know how to do it. And I thank God athletics is seriously involved in it and is learning about it. And I'm sure that we maybe look back in a couple of years and go, boy, it's very different now. But I don't think there's much to protect from, but someone else, again, I'm not on the front lines of that. So
we had an athletic board meeting today, and one of the I was sharing a little perspective from like the Big Ten conference level, and one of the things that is jarring when you look at the rooms where a lot of the administrative rooms where a lot of decisions are being made right now is that, for example, the chancellors and presidents in the conference at the current schools, just about every chancellor or president is new to her or his position within the last 2 years.
Wow.
So that means that, like, if you were to go back 2 or 3 years ago, it was almost an entirely different room of leaders. And so that's another challenge that you see, I think, across a lot of the country. A lot of the top administrative positions, both like university administrators, are turning over very quickly. And so they're coming into this long simmering conversations and policy debates without necessarily the history, not only in the bigger issues, but in the local traditions, like at the school where they are. And that makes it even more difficult. So I'm just saying that to say that Coach Clark's perspective is so rich for us because he's been active at the national level of his sport He's been a, like I said at the beginning, a parent in the sport in different areas, and most notably the coach here for so long that he's seen so many things come and go and seen trends. And so, Coach, your long haul perspective has been awesome for us tonight. So thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time away from your family tonight and being with us.
My family, I just have to catch up on all those crazy newspapers I read. No, I do not. That would be weird. I hope I didn't say anything too controversial. I got to tell you, sometimes it's hard for me. Like, we're in a big meeting, athletic department meeting or something, and there's always, I have this running dialogue in my head. You got to say that, one part on the guy on my shoulder, and the other guy's saying, no. Just hold your tongue. Just hold your tongue. It's a constant battle with me. So anyway, I appreciate this forum. And as I told you, when I'm done coaching, Peter, count me in as a student. If I'm not sure who the people that vet and who gets accepted, but I got to get through Sarah Jimenez. That's not going to be easy, but she might make an exception in my case. So.
Well, Coach Gerardo Jimenez got in, so that probably increases your chances.
All right. Well, that's important to know. I mean, he didn't, and yeah, okay. He is doing it.
He is
That's awesome.
officially a student.
Good. And, if you're a student your whole life in one way or another. So, but this is great stuff. And thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much.
I got some eligibility rowing wise if you want. If you want a 50-year-old overweight guy, to sink the boat, I can help out in that way.
I could use some help on the management side, Gerardo, anytime.
Thank you everyone for joining. Just a quick note that Coach Jackson, we will not have a session this Friday with Coach Jackson, but we will resume that soon. We'll keep you posted on that.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Good night.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank
Night,
you,
everybody.
Maria.
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Thanks, Pete. Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'll go have like a cookie or something.
Go have a cookie.
Yeah.
Hey, it's your birthday today?
Yeah.
I know. I told him if you knew about that, you would have brought him a whole slew of something.
Oh, you're getting payback on this for sure.
All right.
We
all
just
right.
figure out when you're in the office again.
Okay.
All right, I'll put it on your calendar.
I will. All right. Good night,
All right,
everybody.
good night. See ya.
Bye.